Retell is one of the most powerful AI voice agent tools on the market right now, but most people end up only using about 10 to 15% of its features. After building dozens of voice agents for real businesses and handling well over 25,000 real client phone calls, I've mapped out every single feature in Retell that actually matters. So in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to master 95% of Retell so you can create powerful voice agents that actually sound great and are ready to roll out to real businesses. So when people hear AI voice agent, they picture something closer to one of those automated bank phone systems you fight with, a robotic voice that drones through scripted options, leaves long pauses before every response, and won't let you cut in even when it's clearly heading in the wrong direction. That's not what this is. Retell is a voice agent deployment platform. You build your agent, you give it a real phone number, and it handles inbound and outbound calls all day long without you being involved. Now, people tend to lump Retell in with 11 Labs and Vappy, but they're pretty different products when you get into it. 11 Labs started as a voice generation company, and they're brilliant at making synthetic voices sound real, probably the best in the industry. They've since added conversational AI on top of that, but at their roots, they are a text-to-speech business that's turning text into AI voice, not phone calls. And Vappy is more like a build-it-yourself option. It lets developers wire their own voice agent together from different pieces, pick a voice from one company, a language model from another, a phone provider from a third. There's plenty of flexibility, but it's just not quite as beginner friendly as Retell. Retell stands out because it was founded specifically to handle real-time phone calls by people who actually know and live this stuff. The CTO spent 4 years leading next generation speed translation at Google. The founders came out of Google, ByteDance, and Meta. They're growing exponentially, and they're now powering over 40 million AI phone calls every single month. Retell was built for phone calls and, in my opinion, strikes the perfect balance between newbie friendliness and advanced tools for power users. So let me show you exactly how to use it to get set up. Right, let's get you set up inside Retell so you can follow along. Signing up takes about 30 seconds, email, password, verify your account, and then you're in. On pricing, let me show you what Retell actually charges right now. They've got a pay-as-you-go model. So the base voice engine starts at around 7 cents per minute, and every new account gets $10 in free credits with 20 concurrent calls included. That's plenty for testing. What you'll actually pay per minute depends on which language model you choose, which voice engine you use, and your phone setup, but I'll cover that all as we go. But on average, you're going to use that $10 free and maybe another $20 testing things out as you move into production. There is one thing worth knowing though, it's a massive benefit for us running this business. With Retell, it's all on one bill. There's one platform and one invoice. If you're using 11 Labs agents, your voice cost, your language model, and your phone provider are all separate bills from separate companies. Vappy is very similar. You'll be stitching together multiple vendors. The nice thing with Retell is it keeps a lot of those costs under one roof, and that matters more than you think when you're running agents in production. On the dashboard, there's 4 places you're going to be spending your time. So agents is where you build your voice agents. Knowledge base is where you store reference materials that the agent can pull from, and phone numbers is where you'll be setting up the numbers that allow your agent to call in and receive calls too. Call history is where every call you've ever handled lives, with full transcripts and recordings. Don't worry about the rest of the menus for now. One of them lets you run outbound calls to hundreds of numbers in parallel, and one flags problem calls automatically so you're not listening through every recording. We'll come back to all of these features later. First, let's build a voice agent. Let's build a voice agent from scratch right now. When you hit Create Agent, Retell gives you 2 choices, single prompt and conversational flow. And here's what I'd strongly recommend, and I'll explain why properly in a minute. Start with a single prompt agent. If you've ever seen my previous video, you'll know I've got a framework called the 5-section framework for structuring your voice agent's prompt. And this prompt structure will allow you to handle 80% or more of what you need without ever touching conversation flow. We'll come back to conversation flow later for the very specific situations when you genuinely need it. A quick reminder on the 5-section framework. The 5 sections are mode settings, global rules, structured output, call flows, and reference and context. I do have another video that breaks down this method exactly. And once you have that prompt, you'll be ready to add it to Retell. You see there's a single text box here for your system prompt. That's where you'll paste your entire agent prompt. I'll paste my example 5-section framework prompt straight in here. That's easy for the model to read, easy to debug when something goes wrong, and things will go wrong, that's normal, but having a structured prompt means you can find the problem quickly instead of hunting through a wall of text. In this instance, the prompt is for a receptionist for a heating company based in the UK. Now let's select a voice. Retell offers a whole bunch of voices on here, and that includes all of the major synthetic voice providers. So 11 Labs, OpenAI, AI, Cartesia, Minimax, and Fish, all inside the same platform. Pricing for each voice platform varies, but as you can see here, we can switch between the voice platforms and models to get a sense of what the cost will be per minute. If we select the voices that are tagged as Retell from Cartesia, Minimax, Fish, or OpenAI, they all cost 1.5 cents per minute. Meanwhile, 11 Labs voices cost 4 cents per minute. So that's a large increase in cost, but the 11 Labs voices, especially the British accents, are superior to any of the other platforms. I'll play around here to find a voice and a price that works for you. For this demo, we're going to go with Archer Conversational, which is a really good 11 Labs British male voice for phone calls. One thing I have to mention here, real-time conversational synthetic voice generation isn't quite as polished as the pre-rendered stuff that you would get from the 11 Labs Studio if you were making an audiobook or a pre-rendered voiceover, and that's just the nature of voice technology.
Hi, I'm Archer, and this voice is pre-rendered inside 11 Labs and takes a few seconds to generate. You can apply different emotions to my voice, and I can even laugh.
In Retell, you're generating voices on the fly, processing live speech recognition and responding in under a second. But the trade-off is worth it, because what you get in return is minimal latency, that's the gap between you talking and the agent responding, and proper interruption handling. And I'll show you all of that means with a live demo. 11 Labs is constantly updating their voice generation engines, and what you're hearing now is the worst the technology will ever be. It's only going to get better. In terms of languages, Retell and 11 Labs support over 30 languages with automatic detection built in. If you need multilingual agents, it's all there. And then we can also select the large language model that we want to power the AI receptionist. So pricing for LLM models works in a very similar fashion. You can choose to run your voice agents on Google Gemini, Claude, or OpenAI, and each of them has an associated cost you can see here in the dropdown. Personally, we have found that OpenAI's 4.1 fast tier, which is 2.4 cents per minute, has been a solid and reliable workhorse for us across dozens of voice agents and tens of thousands of phone calls. Next up is Agent Handbooks. These are one-click toggles that layer proven behaviors into your agent without you having to write any prompting for them. So there's 3 tabs to choose from here. Personality and tone covers things like professional behavior, filler words and empathy. Accuracy and format handles echo verification if it hears itself, NATO phonetic alphabet, speech normalization, and smart matching so the agent doesn't treat Emily and Amelia as the same person. And the trust and safety tab covers AI disclosure and scope boundaries, which keep the agent honest and on task. Honestly, I would have killed for some of these about a year ago. Getting the NATO alphabet to work reliably without a toggle like this used to take hours of prompt testing. Now it's just a switch. It's super handy. On our end, we've actually at this point built most of these ourselves and we inject them into every agent that we ship. But if you're starting out, flip these agent handbooks off and on and see what you like and save yourself the headache that we went through. To the right hand side of your prompt, each agent has a selection of settings that you can tweak and tune. We'll just run through them. Functions are your tools that you can add to any agent. This includes pre-built tools from Retell. Your agent can invoke these tools at any time, and there are things here such as transfer a call, end the call right now. We've got native integration with cal.com to check and book calendars. We can press digits if we need to navigate an IVR menu. You are able to send and receive SMSs, extract variables from the call, which you can then use within the brand new code tool. It's a really new feature and it's really very powerful. You can create a tool that requires complex logic but doesn't require an API call or relying on your AI to figure things out for itself. In this example, we have a calculator that could be used to measure the volume of a concrete required for a construction site. You can also create a custom function from scratch, and this is where you would create an API call, for instance, if you needed to check a postcode or to talk to a CRM or to make a booking or to find a price list, for example. Next up is the knowledge base, and the knowledge base is a standalone collection of information that your voice agent can pull from during a live call. There's a lot to cover here, which I'll do later in the video. Next is speech settings, and this is where you tune how your agent actually talks. You can drop in a background sound so it doesn't feel like the agent's calling from an empty room, although I always feel these kind of sound fake. Responsiveness controls how eagerly the agent jumps in once it thinks you've finished your turn. If it's too eager and it cuts people off, or too slow and every reply lands with an awkward pause, this can actually be adjusted, and this can even be adjusted on the fly. Interruption sensitivity is how quickly the agent stops talking when it hears you cut in. Crank that up if callers tend to talk over the bot, and you can ease it off if the background noise is making it stop mid-sentence. It's got really good actually at recognizing recognizing human speech versus background noise, which used to be, maybe a year ago, a real problem. The reminder frequency just decides how many times the agent will re-engage a caller who's gone silent before it gives up and ends the call. And there's a pronunciation dictionary where you can paste in the pronunciation of tricky words or names or things that the model tends to mangle. Real-time transcription settings are next, and let's run through these. This is the layer that turns what your caller says into text for the language model to work with. If a lot of your callers are phoning from building sites or car workshops or anywhere with a load of background noise, this is where you tune the agent to cope with that. You've got a denoising mode and a transcription mode to play with, plenty to experiment with inside of each. Honestly, we tend to leave these on their defaults for most of our agents, and they perform really well out of the box. But if you know your callers are in tough environments, it's worth testing the alternatives here to see what gives you the cleanest pickup and recognition of voice. Below that is vocabulary specialization, which defaults on general, but Retell does have a medical pre-configured here as well. So if you're running an agent for a healthcare business, you can flip that on. It'll do a much better job of recognizing clinical terms, drug names, and things like that. Finally, we've got boosted keywords. If there are specific words that the model keeps mishearing, could be product names, local place names, or industry jargon, you drop them in here and it nudges the transcription to listen out for them. Call settings is mostly stuff you'll set once and forget. We'll do a quick walkthrough because some of these will save you from some really annoying production bugs. Voicemail detection and IVR hang up both deal with the awkward moments where your agent doesn't actually reach a human. You can tell it to hang up, leave a voicemail, or bow out cleanly if it lands in an IVR tree rather than a real human picking up. User keypad input detection lets the agent listen for key presses during a call, which can be handy if you're asking for a reference number. End call on silence ends the call if there's too much silence for too long, which stops you from burning minutes on dead air. And then ring duration is just how long Retell will let an outbound call ring before it gives up and marks it as a no answer. Post-call data extraction is where you tell Retell what information you want pulled at the end of each call. You define the fields you care about, and Retell runs an extra pass over the transcript once the call wraps up, populates these fields and delivers them back to your dashboard or your webhook or the API. You've got 4 field types to work with here. Use text for written output like a call summary. Use Boolean for yes/no flags like whether the caller is a returning customer. Use number for anything countable like a quoted price or a fleet size. And use selector when you're picking from a fixed list of categories such as job type or region. For the first handful of agents you ship, this is actually genuinely useful because you get clean structured data out of every call without writing any code. But this tool does have a ceiling. Once you start pushing it hard, you'll run into the same issues we have, and we'll get into that properly towards the end of the video. Next up is security and fallback settings, and that's where you set your compliance rules and your safety nets. On the security side, you can control what Retell stores after each call. You can keep everything and strip out personal information or hold only the basic attributes. There's also a personally identifiable information redaction layer if you need fine control, and there's safety guardrails to restrict risky content in AI responses. You can send signed URLs if you need a URL that your voice agent sends to expire within 24 hours. Fallbacks are your insurance policy. If your chosen voice provider, say 11 Labs, goes down mid-call, Retell will immediately switch to a backup voice that you've nominated so the call doesn't drop, and you can set default values for your dynamic variables. So if one of them ever comes through empty, the agent has something sensible to fall back on instead of tripping up. Quick one if you haven't come across webhooks before. A webhook is just a URL that Retell will ping with data when something happens on a call, like the call starting, the call ending, or post-call analysis finishing. You give Retell the URL, Retell fires an HTTP request at it with the call details, and whatever's listening at the other end can do something useful with that information. So at the end of a call, you can send the transcript and any of the other fields that you nominate via a webhook to further automation tools. We mostly use make.com, which is very similar to Zapier or NAN. In our scenario, after a call, the entire thing is passed to a make scenario that stores the call data on our server, assesses its quality, puts together an email notification, and logs the call within our customers' CRMs. I'll touch more on this in a minute. Again, I have to flag here before we wrap up that in Retell there is only a single agent level webhook URL per agent. Rather than having dedicated slots for different stages, all events you select ping that one specific webhook. That's fine when you're running one agent, but it starts to pinch when you've got 20 clients wired up. More on that at the end of the video. MCP settings is where Retell plugs into the model context protocol. That's a newer standard that lets AI agents reach out to external tools without anyone writing a custom integration. In practice, your agent could verify a caller's account against another system mid-call without Retell needing a native integration for it. We don't use it ourselves because our own API-driven setup covers the same ground, but it's worth knowing that it's there. Now, this is the most important bit of the whole video. We're going to run a live test call, and I want you to watch what happens when I interrupt the agent mid-sentence.
Hi, this is Hartwell Heating. How can I help?
Hello, I need to get a boiler repair booked in, please.
Of course, I can get a repair booked in for you. I'll just need a few details. Can I start with your full name, please?
Yeah, my name is Ben Milsom. That's Milsom.
Thanks, Ben Milsom. Got it. Can you tell me a bit about the problem with your boiler?
Before we do that, why should I choose you guys?
I'm sorry if that sounded a bit informal. Hartwell Heating has been serving South Manchester since 2011 with experienced gas-safe registered engineers. We offer a 12-month parts and labour guarantee on all repairs. And our engineers carry photo ID and gas-safe cards for your peace of mind.
Okay, you know what? I'm fine. Let's go
help?
ahead, definitely.
Got it. Can I check? Is it your boiler that needs repairing?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Thanks, Ben. Let me grab your address so we can get an engineer out. What's your door number?
So did you hear that? There was no talking over me. The agent heard me cut in. It stopped what it was saying and it picked up my actual question cleanly. And that right there is a real Retell difference. It's not about the raw speed, although the latency is really, really fast in Retell. It's about that turn taking, the way a real conversation works, where people interrupt each other and it doesn't fall apart. A lot of the other voice platforms I've tested either talk over you, or they cut in mid-word, or force this unnatural pause before every single response. Configuring agents in the Retell platform always seems to get this right. Under the hood, Retell is using DeepGram to manage that turn taking, but you won't need to mess around with those transcription settings to get a really natural sounding call. Everything else in this video, every feature, every integration matters less than the fact that when a real person rings your agent, it sounds like a genuine conversation. And before we move on, we can hop over to the call history tab, where we can find that test call that we just did, and we can view the exact cost, the recording, the analysis of the call, and lots more granular details too. Finally, within the agent creation section, there is simulation. Let's take a look at those simulations before we move on. This is where you test your agent without having to pick up the phone every single time. The fastest mode is AI simulated chat. You type in a user prompt, give the simulated caller a personality, set a success criterion, and hit run. You'll see the conversation play out in real time and whether your agent hit the mark. It's great for spot checking a change you've just made to the prompt. The bulk tool lets you line up 10, 20, 100 test cases all in one go. You set each one in the dashboard with its name, user prompt, success criteria, and any dynamic variables the agent needs. You hit run on the lot and you get a pass or a fail table showing which test cases behaved and which ones didn't. We'll come back to simulations properly later in the video when we get to deploying agents to production. For now, just know it's here and it's the single fastest way to stress test a new agent before you put it in front of real callers, and it's all provided in Retell. So that's everything that goes into a single agent prompt, and it sounds really good. So let's talk about what happens if you really need to get complex with your voice agent's behavior, and that's where we'll introduce conversational flow agents. Conversational flow is a visual builder where you drag and drop nodes onto a canvas, and each node represents a different stage of a conversation. Each one can have its own prompt, its own language model, its own tools, and its own knowledge base if you want. So I'm going to push back on something here, because conversational flow agents look amazing and they make very impressive screenshots. But if you build your single prompt agent properly using my 5-section framework prompt, it will stay on track and you won't need to touch conversational flow. So when do you actually need to build these conversational flow agents? You need it when your agent has to follow a strict sequence of steps in an exact order, and each step depends on the one before it completing successfully. This is especially useful if those steps require multiple tools and API calls. Let me give you a real example. We built an agent here for Example Heating, a boiler maintenance company. That booking process involves 30 separate calls and potentially over 80 steps. We need to check the caller's postcode is exactly correct against the UK address database. We need to check an engineer's availability from the CRM. We need to check that engineer has the appropriate license for the job, and we need to actually book that job into the CRM. Every single step needs the previous one to finish properly before it can start, and every single step requires a different API call. That's a conversational flow job. You genuinely can't do that with a single prompt. We've tried, because the agent needs guarantees that step 2 won't fire until step 1 has come back cleanly. You just can't risk the large language model tripping over itself and jumping between call flow steps, but for everything else, for the actual conversational parts, a single prompt agent handles it better because the context of the whole conversation stays intact across the call. One cool thing to add here is that Retell have added these node level overrides, so you could run your greeting on a cheaper language model, your booking node on something beefier. So here's a demo of that. In this scenario, we will use the cheapest possible LLM to collect their name, because that's very simple to do. We might use a slightly more smart model here, GPT 4.1, to collect their door number and postcode, and also read our collection handbook about how to collect and listen out for postcodes. the postcode is extracted and the door number is extracted. An API call is sent over to the postcode lookup system, and then we might use another smarter LLM here just to confirm the address that we've collected is correct. And if it's not, it would transition back and cycle through that again. They're shipping these new features at a really good pace, which is really encouraging. Oh, and another nice thing with conversational flow agents are the reusable components. So you can package up a chunk of a flow and drop it into another agent. And that becomes useful once you're running more than 2 or 3 agents in production. But I'd still recommend sticking with a single prompt agent for many, many use cases. Right, so we've got the conversation handled, but what if your agent needs to reference a large amount of knowledge? Knowledge bases are probably the most misunderstood feature in voice agent platforms. A knowledge base is a collection of information that your agent can pull from during a live call. It could be product details, pricing, FAQs, company policies. Instead of the agent guessing or making something up, it goes and attempts to retrieve the actual answer from the source material you've given it in real time. Setting a knowledge base up is really straightforward in Retell. You can add a URL, upload a file, or paste in raw text, and they all work the way you'd expect. You link a knowledge base to your agent, and Retell handles the retrieval automatically during calls. You don't need to change anything in your prompt. In conversational flow, you can attach different areas of a knowledge base to different nodes. So your pricing node pulls from your pricing document, your product node pulls from your product specs. That's the production grade way to do it. But here's where I kind of disagree with a lot of tutorials around AI voice agents. Knowledge bases are a double-edged sword. Used well, they make your agent sound incredibly well informed. Used badly, and they'll tank your call quality. Here's my rule of thumb. Use a knowledge base when the agent needs to quote something structured, factual, and likely to change over time. Prices, opening hours, and FAQ list. That's where retrieval works brilliantly, with short, clean chunks of information with clear answers. Don't use the knowledge base as a dumping ground. I once audited a business where someone had uploaded their entire website into the knowledge base, including hundreds of blogs, and was just kind of hoping that the language model in real time would fish out the right bit during a live call in those fractions of a second between turn taking. That's just not how it works. The calls would get slow because the agent was pulling chunks from every direction. The retrieval was noisy and the agent kept quoting the wrong page from the website. And we've had our own lessons too. Early on, we had a knowledge base pointing at a Google Sheet that updated daily. Retell cached an older version of the sheet, and we didn't spot that for a day and a half, which meant the agent was quoting last week's prices to callers. Well, the fix was actually really simple. Once we noticed, we had to move to a proper database with an API call, but the lesson stuck. When you use a knowledge base, own how and when it refreshes. Don't just assume it's pulling the latest version or that the LLM will accurately pluck the correct chunk of context from a huge unstructured database. Under the hood, Retell uses something called streaming RAG, which is real-time retrieval during the call. And it works well when you feed it small, well-shaped chunks of information. It falls apart when you treat it like a search engine for everything your business has ever published. If you need to have one, keep your knowledge base tight and predictable. Now, let's attach a phone number to this agent. Okay, this is where your agent stops being a demo and starts being a real thing that answers a real phone. There's 2 ways to connect a number in Retell. You can get a US and Canadian number directly through Retell, which is the easiest option and costs between $2 and $5 a month, or you can bring your own number from an external provider such as Twilio. If you're just getting started, get your number through Retell. It's one click, the number's live in a few minutes. You attach it to your agent and you're done. If you don't want US or Canadian numbers, and for anything at scale though, you'll probably want to bring in your own numbers, and this is usually done through Twilio. If you haven't come across it before, Twilio is basically a phone network company for developers. They let you buy phone numbers, send text, and route calls through their global infrastructure. A lot of businesses already use Twilio for their phone systems, so being able to plug those existing numbers into Retell is important. Now I do have to be honest here, importing a Twilio number into Retell is really more work than it should be. On other platforms, you can do the whole thing in the dashboard. With Retell, you first need to create something called a SIP trunk in Twilio, which is essentially a bridge between Twilio's phone network and Retell's platform. Then you buy the number in Twilio, then you route the number to the SIP trunk, then you import the number into Retell, then you attach it to your agent. There's a guide in the Retell docs, but it's not a one-click job, and it can feel intimidating the first time you see it. So that's 5 steps across 2 different platforms, and you will get at least one of them wrong the first time. Using the Retell API, we've built an automation that handles the entire process. You can punch in the client details on one end, and the automation buys the phone number, routes it, imports it into Retell, and attaches it to the right agent in a few seconds. I'll talk about that more in the next section because it's the same piece of infrastructure that lets us go from 0 to a live agent in 60 seconds. Now you'll also need to decide whether your agent handles inbound calls, outbound calls, or both. Inbound is your classic classic receptionist setup where people ring in and the agent picks up. Outbound is where the agent dials out, which is what you'd use for things like appointment reminders or sales follow-ups. You choose the direction when you link the agent to the number, and Retell handles the rest. One thing to note here is if you're running outbound campaigns in the US, Retell supports branded caller ID, which is known as CNAM, which means the person you're ringing sees your business name on their screen instead of a random number. That makes a big difference to answer rates, but sadly CNAM is just not supported in the UK or in most other places in the world in the same way it is in the USA, and there is no national UK CNAM database. We get asked about this a lot, so it's worth knowing. And there it is, a real phone, a real number, a real AI receptionist picking up and handling the call. That's the moment when this stops feeling like a tutorial and starts feeling like a business. Okay, now we're going to get into the features that separate someone who's had a play with Retell from someone who's ready to run production voice agents every day. Batch calling. First, this is outbound campaigns at scale, with no limits on how many calls can run at once. You get up to 20 concurrent calls in your standard membership, and you can pay Retell for more, or you can just queue them up. You upload a list of contacts, you assign an agent and hit launch. Retell then runs all of those calls in parallel. Let's just put that demo into action. So we hit create a batch call. Let's call it test 1. Now the CSV I'm uploading is completely dummy data, so none of these names or numbers are real. We've put 50 people in there. The variable is which type of boiler they have. We've got a phone number on there. We would then choose how many concurrent calls we want to reserve for our other agents. We've got a total of 20 to play with. We could schedule at what time we want these to go out. So we can choose a safe window. So let's say we didn't want them to go on a Saturday or a Sunday. And then we would just hit send, and that would begin the batch call process. This feature is only really useful if you have a process to collect up the result of all of those calls. So I'd suggest some kind of post-call automation that summarizes each call, flags any specific outcomes or data, and updates each call record into a CRM. Next is Retell Assure, their AI quality assurance. This is Retell's native call quality assurance tool. It'll monitor your calls in the background and flag problems without you having to listen to every single recording. Once you're past the first few hundred calls, is genuinely useful. It catches broken flows before your team hears about them through a complaint. This is a relatively new feature in 2026, and the first 1,000 minutes of calls are free to test. So using Webhooks or the Retell API, you're able to trigger anything you like during or after a call. In our common scenario, when the call finishes, a webhook fires, an automation plays out that results in the structured call data landing in Go High Level, which is our CRM. We send confirmation emails, we update the client record, and we store the recording compliantly on our own servers. That entire post-call pipeline runs in about 3 seconds. And Retell handled the hard part there. The voice, the language model, and the phone network were all orchestrated inside that one platform with a single bill. We handle the business logic downstream. If you were doing this on some other voice platforms, you'd be wiring together 4 or 5 different services just to get to this point. And to touch on the Retell API and developer side of things here, this is where things get really serious. Using Retell's API, it's possible to drive everything we've talked up to this point by code. So that's hands-free from nothing to a live deployed voice agent with his own voice number and a properly structured prompt that's been put through 100 simulated calls and is polished, ready to go live. We also use the API to inject our own baseline prompt as a custom variable into every single call, meaning every agent we ship starts with our prompting standards already baked in. And this is similar to the agent Handbooks feature that I mentioned earlier, but custom built for what's worked best for us over time. And that's how we go from a blank slate to a new client's agent being live on the phones in under 60 seconds without rebuilding from scratch and without anyone touching the dashboard. So that's what running Retell at production scale looks like, but none of it matters until your agent's actually taking calls from real customers. So you've built your voice agent. It sounds good, it handles calls properly. Now, what does it actually take to put this thing live? For batch testing, you can generate fake call scenarios as JSON files using AI and run them through the simulation tool. It's a quick way to stress test a new agent before real callers get anywhere near it, and that worked great for us, but at the scale that we were testing and building agents, we ended up building our own simulation tool off Retell because we needed more control over the test conditions. But for most people, the built-in batch tool is more than enough. Run your agents through every conversation path you can think of, every edge case, every knowledge-based question. If you've got a booking flow, book fake appointments before you let a real caller anywhere near it. If you've got an objection handling built in, try to be as difficult as possible to put your agent through its paces. The iteration cycle here is pretty simple. Listen to real calls, spot the patterns where things aren't perfect, find the specific section in the prompts or the tools that owns that behavior, fix it, and then validate that fix. Test your latency too, that's the gap between the caller and the AI responses. Benchmarks put Retell at around 580 to 620 milliseconds average response time. VAPI can sometimes be faster, but both are comfortably within the 800 millisecond threshold where conversations feel natural to the caller. What we found is that raw speed is less important than smooth turn taking. If you think about that demo I showed you, that's worth more on a real call than shaving 50 milliseconds off the response time by using a cheaper LLM that's not as good, or a voice that doesn't sound as natural. A conversation that flows naturally beats a conversation that's technically faster but sounds robotic. In terms of compliance, Retell is SOC 2 Type 2 certified, it's HIPAA ready, and it's GDPR compliant through Amazon Web Services data processing addendum. Retell's hosting is Amazon Web Services US region, not EU. So if you're in healthcare, finance, or legal, have that conversation with your data protection officer before you deploy. Don't let me or any YouTuber be the reason you skip that call. So there's lots to love about Retell and using it in production, but there's 3 places where Retell falls short compared to other platforms we work with. First is that post-call data extraction. It hits a ceiling. Retell's built-in extraction, which I showed you, is brilliant for pulling out a handful of clean fields, name, phone number, booking time. But the moment you need it to extract 12 or 15 fields from a single call, it gets messy. And because the extraction runs as a separate process from the actual conversation, it can't actually reference your agent prompt, only the call transcript. So we've had calls where the agent clearly heard something during the conversation, but the extraction process just couldn't find it because it didn't have the context of the prompt to help it. In most other platforms we've tested, the data extraction will be fully aware of the agent's prompt, which gives it the context it needs to seek the right data to extract. Second is the agent handbook ceiling. Retell ships with these default agent handbooks, and they're really cool and they're perfectly fine when you're starting out. But after a few hundred calls, you're going to start spotting patterns, phrases that work well, phrases that don't, specific ways of handling certain situations. You'll want to bake those into the handbook itself, but there's no layer in Retell for you to add your own material on top of that handbooks. So we ended up building our own system for this. If you're running 1 or 2 agents, you're not going to notice. If you're scaling past that, you might end up doing the same. And then third is that webhook issue. There is a single agent level webhook URL field per agent. So rather than having dedicated slots for different stages, all the events you select ping that one specific address. That's fine when you've got a single client, but when you're running 20 agents for 20 different clients and one of them needs their own CRM wired into the call lifecycle, you're suddenly forced to manage these specific requirements through that one shared URL. It would be so much cleaner if you could specify multiple webhooks at the agent level. For instance, having separate dedicated URLs for pre-call and post-call events. Despite all of that, Retell is the platform that we run a large portion of our business on, and now you know why. So that's basically everything you need to use Retell properly, but knowing the platform is only half of it. The real question is how you can actually use it to create great AI voice agents that sound and respond in a manner that keeps your human callers on the line. I've referenced that we write our prompts using a 5-section prompt framework, and if you hit this video here, I'll break down exactly how you can create AI voice agents better than 99% of people. I'll see you there.